Hello, welcome back to the Fashion Nap. Today I'm sitting down with someone that I admire so much. This episode is very special. There's only one guest and we talked. I'm bringing you a conversation with Marcellas Reynolds. He is the author of the Supreme series, that is Supreme Models, Supreme Actresses, and Supreme Sirens that just came out. You might recognize Supreme Models from the series hosted by a little platform called Vogue. Marcellas executive produced it alongside Iman. The series documents the journey of the black supermodel. It was a 6-part series that was so influential and so important to the fashion and modeling industry. It's the first of its kind that really shared the true story and the trials and tribulations of the black woman in fashion. Marcellas tells us everything about his story from the beginning right to the present day. We hear about his own modeling career, his upbringing, how he got into fashion, the importance of the Supreme trilogy, and what he's going to do next. I know you're going to enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. Can you believe me and Marcellas were talking for almost 3 hours? It was so hard to edit, but I think I've kept in all the best bits for you. Also, I made a huge sacrifice this week because I look absolutely busted for the first half of this interview. But the story is more important than the look. The reward you're going to get if you stick to around the 30-minute mark is that I will suddenly appear looking gorgeous again because I finally moved. Without further ado, I present to you Marcellas Reynolds. For anyone that's not familiar with the Supreme series, for anyone that lives under a rock, tell us a little bit about Supreme.
Supreme is a series of 3 books. They are art books, the first ever of their kind. In 2019, I released the first book, which is Supreme Models, Iconic Black Women Who Revolutionized Fashion. My ex-literary agent, actually, she calls it the book that changed the face of fashion. Because before Supreme Models, there were no art books that were in the space that told the story of the Black female completely. Right? So these books, I like to say, there's always this dialogue in bookstores about where my books should be. Are they photography books or are they art books? These books should sit next to the Tom Ford book. They should sit next to the Peter Lindbergh book, the Linda Evangelista, Stephen Meisel book. They should sit next to the Chanel book, right? They should sit next to a book from 2011 called Vogue Model, The Faces of Fashion, which is the book that inspired the very first book. In 2011, a book called Vogue Model, The Faces of Fashion, which is the British Vogue art book, came out. And I ordered that book because I collect art books for years, for decades now. I've been collecting art books as a way to self-educate about things I don't know that much about. So art, architecture, design, designers, advertising. And I use art books in my work as a stylist and art director for inspiration. So I'm always like, ooh, let me look at movies from the 70s, because I always go back to movies like The Stepford Wives or The French Connection. And so when the British Vogue book came out, I read it from cover to cover. I got it. The book was at least $100, super expensive. And what I discovered was there was only 2 Black models in it, Naomi Campbell and Iman. But there were like 100 models in this big, thick, oversized art book. And I was incensed because I was like, where is Tyra Banks? Where is Veronica Webb, the first Black model with a major cosmetics contract? Where's Alec Weck? Where's Leah Kabidi? All of these models had been out before. Where were the girls from the Battle of Versailles? Where was, most importantly, Donielle Luna, the first Black model to have the cover of any Vogue when she appeared on the cover of British Vogue in 1968? That moment was inspiration. And that was when I came up with the idea for Supreme Models. It took 7 years for me to sell it. I sat in rooms with publishers who wanted to meet me because I was celebrity stylist Marcellas Reynolds, or I was talking head Marcellas Reynolds. And they would ask me if I had a book idea. And I would say, Supreme Black Models. And they would tell me to my face, some of the biggest publishers in the world, white men, would say to me, a Black gay guy, that a book about Black women wouldn't sell. 3 publishers, at least in my face, passed on my book. when they had asked me to come in and talk to them about writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
So it took 8 years for me to, it took 8 years for the book to come out, 7 years for me to find a literary agent that believed in me, and then to find a publisher, Abrams, to publish the first book. And then Supreme Models begat Supreme Actresses, because when I was finishing Supreme Models, I was like in this space where I was like, huh, every model wants to be an actress. You know what I mean? And there's actually a cut of Supreme Models that has a section that's called Models to Actresses. It's got Tyra Banks, and because Tyra Banks was in
No, I have
Life
it right
Size.
here.
Yes. Excuse me while I like sort through all three of my books to
Oh,
find
this whole thing?
my um and it had like Tyra, and it had
Hmm.
Naomi, and it had, well, Naomi acts a little, and it had Iman, because she was in Out of Africa. She
Hmm.
was in a movie I think called Ticket to Paradise, and she was in No Way Out. So Tamiko Frazier was in Head Over Heels. And that section didn't make Supreme Models, but it had me thinking about what the next book was. So it was actresses. And then when I was writing actresses, I was inspired by Dreamgirls, the musical, the Broadway musical. And so that had me thinking about Diana Ross and the Supremes, but it
Right.
had me thinking about Cheryl Lee Ralph and Loretta Devine, who were in the original Broadway cast of Dreamgirls. And I was thinking about Dreamgirls, the movie, with Jennifer Hudson and Beyonce and Anika Noni Rose. And then I was like, wait, am I going to do a book about Black female music artists? And now we have Supreme Sirens.
It's such a amazing story that you just persevered for all those years to get your point across because you knew you were right. Anybody with sense knows you were right. And what frustrates me hearing your story is that they said to you, oh, this book is not going to sell, because that is exactly what the agencies were told the black models in the first place. Black models don't sell magazines. And how many times was that disproved? Right?
It's
So
that
now
you.
it's
I'm
like the
so
models
happy
are,
you just drew that parallel, because I
yeah.
never drew that parallel before. Because it's true. So many of the black models that are in Supreme Models tell the stories of being told that they couldn't get an agency because they were too dark, or they were too this, or they were too that, or they would go to an agency and the agency would say, "Well, we already have one black girl or two black girl," but then you'd look at the board and they represented like 300 models. They represented
Yeah.
every iteration of a white model possible,
Hmm.
and they had to like pack it up and go back home. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That dream was like outside of their reach. And I was told the same thing, the book
Yeah.
version, that the models were.
So the models were told they won't sell magazines. This was disproved thousands of times over, like the black issue of Vogue Italia, the most selling issue, you know.
Ever.
And then it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe they can sell magazines, but we can't sell a book about it. It's just like, when does it end? We know what
When
that's
did
code for. We know what it's code for. It's nonsense. So I'm glad that you just didn't take no for an answer, of course not, and stuck with it. And now we have these three amazing books with this beautiful representation. I was reading you were talking about in the foreword, you wanted it to be a representation of Black people in the best way for young kids, especially to see it and know it exists. One thing I wanted to ask you, because I was reading that introduction again last night before our talk, and you mentioned how, so I keep leaning back because I'm sitting at a funny angle, so excuse me. But you talk
I love
about
the
how,
casualness of
this is
it.
just how I sit, in my
That the
corset.
hair is so beautiful. It's like,
Thank you very
okay.
much. But you talk about from a young age being inspired by Jet Magazine, Ebony, Essence, the Sammy Davis Jr. on that cover with the mansion. Uh, I can see it still fresh in your memory. But it seems like from a very young age, Black models and Black Hollywood really shaped your aspiration and how you wanted your life to look. Did you always have that tunnel vision?
The reason that Supreme Models, actresses, and now sirens exist is because when I was a little black boy, my grandmother was the woman that basically raised me. And even though I lived with my mother, my grandmother lived didn't work. She was the doyenne of the family. She had a husband, my grandfather, who worked. So she
Mm-hmm.
took care of the home. So when my mother left the house to go work or do whatever it was what she was going to do, she dropped us off at my grandmother's house. My grandmother had Jet, she had Ebony, and then she had Black Enterprise on her coffee table in her living room. And what I've learned since, what I've realized since as you get older, as you replay things in your head, is my grandmother figured out at a very young age that I was smart.
Mm-hmm.
And so she bought me encyclopedias. She bought me a set of encyclopedias because I would ask her crazy questions. I'd be like, Mama, why don't zombies eat each other? Mama, where's this? Mama, what's that? And she had no idea. So she was like, if you're curious, I'm going to foster that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned recently or realized recently is my grandmother had like maybe a fifth grade education. So she didn't actually read that well. So my grandmother would ask me to read Jet to her and
Right.
read Black Enterprise to her and read Ebony to her. And so as I'm learning to read and I'm getting better at reading, I'm reading to her, and we're both learning at the same time that there is Black excellence out there. Because I lived on the south side of Chicago and we grew up very poor.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was on welfare. It's not the typical story because I don't like that, but it's
Mm.
my story. My mother was never married. She married very late, but she wasn't married to the fathers of any of the three of her kids when we were
Mm-hmm.
growing up. So we all had different fathers. We were on welfare. Like it's that tragic like story that is not just black, but it's a common story to
Mm.
everyone,
Mm.
to a lot of people. And I'm not putting a race on that, but I did grow up poor and in a black neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. And my grandmother's house was a source of inspiration and beauty for me because she aspired to more and she wanted her grandchildren to aspire to more. And so when I was reading these magazines, growing up in poverty, it was expanding my horizon. And I was seeing that there were Black entertainers like Sammy Davis Jr., who was on the cover of an Essence of an Ebony magazine in front of his house in Hollywood, in
Mm-hmm.
front of a big fat ass Cadillac, wearing a blazer. And I think to this day I love blazers because at like 8, I saw Sammy Davis Jr. on the cover of Ebony wearing a blazer with these big ass glasses on, sunglasses on, right? Looking like an
Yeah.
absolute star. And I was like, I want to wear a blazer. And Ebony would always cover models. And it was like, I remember there was an article on Beverly Johnson where they were like, she makes upwards of $5,000 a month, which in the 70s sounded like so much money. You know what I mean? And she travels across the globe to Rome and Paris, and she works with Valentino. And there was an issue with Iman on the cover with her first husband, Spencer Haywood, and her first daughter, Zulika. And I remember I kept that magazine hidden forever because there was something about seeing this little Black girl with her mother and her father, and I had never met my father,
Mm-hmm.
that made me incredibly curious about what it would feel like to know what it was to have a father love you. And so these magazines took me on a journey and they actually showed me that there was a life outside of the life that I was experiencing if I was willing to work for it.
It's just really beautiful because I think a lot of time people can talk about fashion and models, this kind of thing, and make it sound like it's very frivolous and kind of like silly and shallow. And it sounds like a bit like you're telling my story a little bit that we have a lot of parallels because the more I talk to people in these interviews in fashion, I realize there's a lot of people that you just have this natural attraction. Something in you is drawn to this kind of glamour and this kind of pizzazz. And people like you and I, we're not raised around it. There's no reason why we should be obsessed with Gianni Versace when you're 7 years old, because no one's wearing it next door. But it is that escapism.
Can I tell you the one thing, the thing that's the common thread through all the books,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that really inspired my life? and I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of it, but I watched Mahogany when I was like 8 with Diana Ross. And you can't put a little baby gay boy in front of a television and let him watch Mahogany without supervision, without adult supervision. I saw Diana Ross, and the thing about Mahogany for me was that it was shot on the south side of Chicago.
Yes, it was.
So
Yes.
I knew where she was. I knew the building the burnt out building where they had the fashion shoot with all the white models in the building, and Diana Ross was the assistant. I knew where that building was. She rode the train, the elevated train that I had been on with my grandmother and my mother. She rode it to go to work at Marshall Fields. My grandmother on Saturdays took me to shopping with her at Marshall Fields. And my grandmother was that girl back in the day.
And I believe that.
She would dress up, honey. She had gloves and her shoes and her hats matched. And she would have like cashmere coats and she would have her furs and we would get dressed up and I would go shopping with her. My cousin and my brother who lived with me didn't because they were bad. They couldn't settle down. But me being the little gay kid, it was like a kid in a candy store. So I would go shopping with my grandmother, and my grandmother had 2 salespeople at Marshall Fields. And she would come in and they'd be like, Miss Gillespie, we have some things put aside for you. And my grandmother would hold these dresses up and she'd look at them and she'd look at the finishing and she'd be like, do we like this? But my nickname as a child was Buzzy because I talked too much. And she would be like, what, do we like this? And I'd be like, Grandma, cashmere. And I'd be like, Grandma, fur.
Yeah.
Mama, yes. And she would be like, boy, go get me this dress in an 8. And I would run and get the dress in an 8 and I'd run back to her. You know what I mean? And so that coupled with seeing Mahogany with Diana Ross working at Marshall Fields, it just like something imprinted on me. And how did Diana Ross and Mahogany get the hell off of the south side of Chicago? She got discovered as a model and she went to go live in Rome and work as a model in Rome. And when she like is in her outfit and she's stopping traffic wearing the muff and the beautiful purple gown, the form-fitted purple gown, and Anthony Perkins pushes her in the fountain and she comes out of the fountain with the muff and the hair is wet and the muff is wet and the waters, and then it becomes an ad for Revlon Cosmetics. I'm done. Mahogany made me gayer. I'm not going to say Mahogany made me gay because I was clearly gay, but Mahogany made me gay.
Mahogany was a confirmation.
And it made me want to be a model and it made me want to live in Italy. Because I remember yelling to my grandmother who was in the kitchen, Mama, where's Italy? And she was like, little boy, if you don't get that encyclopedia. And then she was like, and when you get that encyclopedia, you come in here and you read to me where Italy is so that when you learn where Italy is, I'll know where Italy is. And I said under my breath, I was like, I just asked the question. She was like, what? And I was like, I'm getting the encyclopedia. You know, and that was the moment. That was the moment for me that it cemented so many things because the encyclopedia was like a magazine. It was this world into, it was like an art book. It was this window into another world that I could learn something, right? And and I always say to Black people, about Black people, we can be anything, but we have to see it because we're so often told that we can't be it. But if we see it and we see other people doing it, and that person happens to be of color, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. It's over. We're going to do it and we're going to conquer it. You know, no one told me that I could write art books, right? No one said you could be a writer. You know, that wasn't part of my journey. I didn't graduate from college. I got discovered and became a model during my 2nd year of college. And I walked away from it and embraced modeling completely and never went back. But I did want to be a writer. That was one of my aspirations. I was a theater major. I was an English major with a theater minor in college. But then Marie Anderson, who discovered Cindy Crawford, found me working in a restaurant.
You're answering all my questions before I ask.
I'll stop.
That was the one I was going to ask next. I was going to say, You and I have in common, Mahogany is our favorite movie, but you and Cindy got something in common even bigger than that. So you carry on, you go.
So I was working my way slowly through college. I got off the south side of Chicago.
Hmm.
Um, my looks and my personality definitely helped that. I was definitely also a victim and a I reveled in my onlyness. I was allowed to walk in rooms where I was the only Black person or the
Hmm.
only gay person. And living on the south side of Chicago, you're sort of told that you're never going to be anything because you're Black, and you're never going to be anything because you're gay. But
Right.
then when I sort of moved into these white areas, those things that made me different and that I was hated for as a child were the things that made me special. And it wasn't necessarily good special, because it's this idea of onlyness I speak of a lot, where you're the only Black person allowed in a space. Like there can only be one Black person in a room. Whatever. I used my onlyness. And one day I was working at one of those restaurants, the hottest restaurant in Chicago at the time. And I walk up to this table, and it's three women. And one of those women is Marie Anderson, who discovers Cindy Crawford, because Cindy Crawford got her start with Elite in Chicago.
Hmm.
And Marie's business partner was at the table. She looks up at me and she's like, "You're very handsome. You should be a model." And all three of the women laugh. And I kind of rolled my eyes and I was like, "Have the salmon. It's wonderful." I was not in the mood for it that day because it's three women. I'm cute. And I thought that they were hitting on me.
Right.
And then Marie goes, "No, when she says you should be a model, you should be a model." And then she pulls out her card and she's like, "I'm Marie Anderson. This is Mary Boneshire. We own Aria," which was the name of the agency they owned together. My attitude changed real quick. I did a complete
Yeah.
180. You don't say I could be a model. And Marie, thank you, Jesus, made me a model. And that just changed everything. Things were happening before I met her. Like, because I was in this hip restaurant and I was where all these photographers and art directors and editors went, a couple of photographers had already shot me for things. So I was that sort of gay Black model that was unself-conscious about the way he looked, because I was thinking of it as like, I'm going to use this as a segue into acting, and every
Right.
shoot that I do is like an acting role. I'm a thespian. But that's what happened.
But it must happen a lot because, as you were saying, when you were doing the Supreme Models book, you were thinking of models that were actors and actresses. You see what I mean? So it flowed in your work, it flows for other people's work, and it flowed in the books that you write. I want to pivot a little bit to Supreme Singers, which is obviously your Supreme Sirens, pardon me, Supreme Sirens. Hello, there she is. And I actually wanted to talk about Missy Elliott.
Do you want to ask me questions, or do you want me to just talk about Missy? Because I could do either.
Let's do a question and then you just go with it after. I'll give you the starting point and then you just go and do your thing. You are one of the people that I could listen to read the phone book, by the way. It's you, Pat Cleveland, and Dapper Dan. They're the three that could just talk. And I will just listen to
Love,
4 hours.
love,
Yeah,
love. I can't
that's
believe you
my
put
list.
me in that category, because
That's my list.
I interviewed Pat for
Yes, I do know.
Supreme Models, the documentary version of Supreme Models, and she is an angel, and she is an icon, and she is a sprite, and she is a legend, and she is
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm.
Oh, so
She's,
ask the Missy question.
one of my patron saints, Pat Cleveland. She's up there. And what a storyteller. The three of you should do an audiobook series, honestly, and I'll listen to all of it. But Missy, because again, I'm seeing the crossovers with your books. So the question, I have a few questions in one, as always. I don't believe that you're going to stop at a trilogy, first of all. I feel like it's never going to end for you. And what I'm thinking when I see Missy Elliott on this cover is that Missy Elliott is a fashion icon, a fashion trailblazer, a trendsetter. Fashion is another one of the many areas where Black people continue to be copied, discredited, that lovely laundry list that we have. Will there be maybe Supreme designers? Would we get some Patrick Kellys in there, some men also?
There's a bunch of questions in there. Okay, so I have said publicly that this is a trilogy and that I'm not going any further with
I don't know if I
this thing.
believe you, Marcellus.
And the reason why I say that is because the books they're art books, but they're so pop culture. And the
Hmm.
three things that really drive pop culture are models, which is fashion, are actresses, which is TV and film and Hollywood, and music.
Right.
So anything else, I think, dilutes the power and impact of the three books. Like people keep saying, oh, do Supreme Athletes, but they're art books. So
True.
if you open the books to any page, there are these wonderful photos of the most beautiful and talented women shot by the greatest photographers of all time. You're not going to get that with any other field. You're not going to get that with athletes. You're not going to get that with dancers. You're not going to get that with politicians or blah, blah, blah. So, because of which, you know, now from talking to me, the things that inspired me as a little boy were fashion, were actresses, were singers, was Diana Ross,
Yeah.
right? You know, in Mahogany, those are the things that I love. So, yes, I might do another book, and I definitely have an idea for another book, but I don't think it'll be part of the Supreme trilogy. I think the
Okay.
Supreme is beautiful and pristine and perfect, and I don't want people to think. Also, I've done 3 books in 5 years, so I don't want people to think that every other year I write a book.
Hmm.
You know, it's not, they're not like that. They take an incredible toll on me to write the book, and they come at a lot of financial expense. I have to pay the licensing fees, and they're really expensive, and they come um out of my advance, and the advance never covers the price of
Mm.
the licensing fees. So I have to pay the difference. So these books are a love letter to the world. They're a love letter to women. They're a love letter to Black women. I write them for little Black girls so that they can go into bookstores all over the world and they can look at the really expensive Tom Ford book and look at the super expensive Rihanna book, but then they can grab my books that are relatively inexpensive in comparison to books
Mm.
like them, and they can take a book home that's populated with women that look like them, that tells the story of women that sometimes came from humble beginnings and made it to the top, but also tells the story of women that made it to the top and fell.
Right.
You know, my mother says you can't have a testimony without a test, and I try to include that in these books. Life is lifing. It's not easy. It's not easy to achieve your dreams. It's not easy to get to the top. You can achieve your dreams and still fail.
Mm.
You can be at the top of the mountain, the top model in the world, and you're not going to stay there. You can be an Academy Award nominated actress like Dorothy Dandridge and die broken, penniless in a hotel room. Maybe Dorothy Dandridge died as a failure, but her legacy lives on to inspire so many other people, and her work opened the door for so many other people.
Mm.
And so she's not a failure. You know what I mean? If there were no Dorothy Dandridge, there would be no Viola Davis, who is on the cover of Supreme Actresses, or Lupita Nyong'o, who's on the back cover of Supreme Actresses.
Well, I believe you a
Now,
little bit more now.
people always say everything you say is a story.
Well, no, I agree with them because you clearly are a natural storyteller. And I feel like that's kind of been present throughout your career trajectory, whether it is styling, telling a story through clothes, or modeling, telling a story. As you just said, you really employed the use of your acting skills and took it really seriously, telling a story with your emotion. And now you're writing books. So really, you are a storyteller. And I think that's
Thank you.
read through everything that you do. I believe you. Supreme is this trilogy, but you're not done making books.
No,
So we were both kind of right. I'm going to take a point.
we're both right. I'm not done writing books just because I don't think I'll do another. And you know what? That's actually a lie. Because if somebody said to me today, if my publisher said to me today, what book do you want to write? I want to go back and do Supreme Models 2.0.
This is music
I
to
want to do
ears,
like
Marcellas.
want to do a big, thick. You know how the Tom Ford books are really
Mm-hmm.
big and really thick? My books are like an oversized tabletop book, right? They're beautiful books. But
Mm-hmm.
I want to do a Supreme Models 2.0 that has over 100 models in it. And it's like big and thick and glossy, like the Rihanna book. And it's
Yeah.
super expensive. Like if I was allowed to go back and redo something, I would do that. And I would add like more models into it, and I would do more interviews because the interviews are such a big part of all my books. I interview as many people featured in the books as possible. And I think that hearing somebody tell their story in their own voice is so important, especially with the older um, legends, icons, right? Because we're losing them. Like my book just came out, and right before it came out, we lost Tina Turner, and that's why it's super important. I interviewed for Supreme Sirens. I interviewed Roberta Flack, and she just had a stroke, and she wanted to be interviewed for this book. When I told her team what the book was and showed them Supreme models and showed them Supreme actresses, Roberta Flack was like, "Yes, I want to be a part of it. Yes, I will pick the photos for it. And yes, I will do an interview." I mean, she just had a stroke. We're going to lose more and more of these older models and actresses and now sirens. And so if I can tell their stories in their own words, I'm going to.
Yeah.
Throughout all the books, even if I don't get to interview them, I will use a quote from them,
Right.
something that I found that resonates with me, and the quote will be on the page big as hell. So you might not read the interview, but when you see that big ass quote that takes up the whole page, you can't help but like
Yeah.
read it.
I did see you mention somewhere that it's not often that you get interviews in these kind of books. And I've never thought of it like that. It's so true. Unless it's written by the person themselves, it's kind of a picture book essentially, with maybe the photographer always gets asked, why did you take this picture? And more so with the models than the actors and sirens. But the way you've done the book really gives these images a new voice that we've never heard before.
So often, because so many people won't grant interviews, that when you, especially in art books, you get an essay by somebody else and
Right.
what their take on the person is or why they think the person is important. And yes, my books are populated with essays about things that are important moments, about the Battle of Versailles, about the importance of Dreamgirls, the Broadway play, about the importance of Mahogany, the movie. And then, in the new book, I write the introduction, but of course, somebody famous and of note writes the foreword. So for Supreme Models, it was Veronica Webb, the icon, the legend, the muse.
Oh, love her.
For Supreme, who you remind me of, by the way. Um,
I'm so happy this is recorded so everyone can hear that you just said that.
and then Supreme Actresses was Gabrielle Union,
Yes.
and now Supreme Sirens was Monica. And so let's talk about Missy on the cover, because you did ask me about
Yeah.
that.
How did you make the decision? Because I joked earlier that obviously it's going to be Missy, but there are many people that could have fought for that spot, that would have been worthy to be on that cover. How did you land on Missy Misdemeanor Elliott?
Okay, so let's talk about that. I just touched my personal copy of Supreme Actresses, and it's sticky. I've allowed it to get something sticky to touch my beautiful book, which is autographed by Zendaya, by the way. Like this thing with me and the books, they're like fanzines, right?
Mhm.
And so now I have these books, and it's my goal to get as many of the women inside the books as possible to sign the books. So Gabrielle Union, I have her signature for Supreme Actresses. I have a ton of models from Supreme Models because I do all these events with the models. But I got Zendaya to sign Supreme Actresses when I was shooting her for the documentary for Supreme Models.
Right.
Yes, I ran my butt in that room while changing out of one dress into her street clothes to go shoot the last episode of Euphoria. And I was like, will you sign my copy of the book? And she was like, yes. And I was like, yay. But I gave her a copy of Supreme Models, and she had never seen it before. And she flips through it and she was like, this is beautiful. And I was like, I know, girl. I make beautiful books. But then she did this thing that was so funny. She stopped on Beth Ann Hardison's photo and she said, oh my God, I love Beth Ann. And I was like, Beth Ann's my angel. She's like my fantasy mother. She's like
Mhm.
everything. And Zendaya told me the story when Zendaya, one of her first acting jobs was like KC Undercover, where she played like a kid spy.
Mhm.
And her father on the show was Kadeem Hardison, who is Beth Ann Hardison's mother. And Beth Ann Hardison used to go to the set with Kadeem, and that's
Whoa.
why Zendaya knows Beth Ann.
Um,
And she has really beautiful memories of Beth Ann from a little girl. And so we both sat there and talked about how much we love Beth Ann. Then Zendaya did something a little bit shady. She called Beth Ann to see if my stories about Beth Ann were true, and they were, because Beth Ann texted me and she said, "So I'm your angel, huh?" And I was like, "Of course, Mama B." And she's like, Zendaya just called me. So Zendaya really wasn't shady. I think Zendaya was reminded that she hadn't talked to Beth Ann for a
mhm.
while, and she was like, "Oh, I just did an interview for Marcellas for the documentary." So
I think she
that's
was
what she did.
excited.
But I love being able to say Zendaya was shady.
She has to go and fact check.
Now let's talk about Miss Ellie, because you will let me go off on
We need to go
tangent.
back to the documentary at some point as well. I have a new question.
Um, okay. In the spirit of full disclosure, Missy was not my first choice. My
Hmm.
first choice was Beyonce,
Right,
but it was incredibly difficult to deal with Beyonce's team, and they ultimately turned it down. But I
right.
completely understand that because Beyonce is Beyonce. So she's
Hmm.
got her own agenda. It's music, it's fashion, it's the kids, it's life. So Beyonce didn't want to be on the cover of my book. I get it.
Hmm.
Whatever. And then we moved on to Rihanna. Because of the documentary and because of Iman, I have a relationship with Rihanna. Rihanna's team was very, very kind to me, but they were like, she doesn't need to be on the cover of another book. And if she does, it's going to be her own book.
Fair enough.
Because Rihanna is on the cover, she has several books out.
Hmm.
So I actually didn't really want Rihanna on the cover of the book because she already has a bunch of art books out. So how does being on the cover of my book differentiate it from the other books
Right.
to the casual viewer? So then we went out to Lizzo, and I really wanted Lizzo to do the cover, and her team saw absolutely no value in my books or in doing this project, which was heartbreaking because I love the idea of a plus size woman on the cover of an art book because that's something we have not seen yet.
Hmm. And there is definitely value in that. So that's kind of mind blowing to me.
Because with my books, you're always going to see the culture. You're always going to see a woman that is dark skinned, or you're going to see natural hair, or you're going to see
Hmm.
something that is really identifiably Black, which is why I love that we landed on Missy, because that photo of Missy on the cover of Supreme
So
Sirens
again,
is so amazing and cool and Black. I mean, the
just so
bi-level
her also.
is so her. It's
And
like,
you recognize that from a hundred miles away. That's Missy.
it's Missy, and it's so her. And like you said, she is like a fashion trailblazer.
Right?
When we talk about Missy and her videos, they're more performance art than videos, and
Mm.
fashion is such an integral part of her. I mean, think about the Rain video. I can't stand, remember? And
Yes.
she's in the plastic suit, and she's got those like Philip, those wonderful sunglasses on that
Like
like
the
a claw.
yeah.
Yeah, and and they're bejeweled. I mean, every time Missy puts out a video, it's not just a video. It's like she creates these characters with fashion, and she takes us on a journey. And even this cover, I love the bob. I love the Gucci sunglasses on her face. I love the big hoop earrings. That's part of the culture. I
Mhm.
love that
Purple
she's wearing a
lipstick.
tracksuit, which is probably Gucci or probably Versace. It's probably styled by June Ambrose, the premier Black stylist, and the nails with the nail art. There's just something that's so Black and
Yeah.
epic and fashion and iconic about Missy and about this cover and about that photo. And I'll tell you another little story about this. I had chosen another photo for the cover.
Ooh, which picture?
Um, it's a picture of Missy Elliott wearing Montclair.
Okay.
It's yellow Montclair like hooded thing. And Missy's mother got involved in this whole process. And Missy's mother was like, I don't like that picture. You have to choose another photo. And I was like, I'm not letting Missy's mother tell me what to do with my book. And Missy's mother was like, you're very much letting me tell you what to do with my book.
It's just funny, isn't it? It's like a prime example. Missy Elliott is Missy Elliott to everybody but Missy Elliott's mum. And I think it's the same for everyone.
So
It's like you
Missy
won't be
Elliott's
doing
mama
that.
was like, I don't like that photo. And I was like, well, I can send you other photos. And Missy Elliott's mama was like, no, I'm going to send you photos that I like.
I love it.
And I was like, okay, Missy Elliott's mom, like, let's see what you got. And she sent this photo. And here's what's even bigger about that. Missy owns her photos.
Of course she does.
She she paid for this photo. She commissioned this photo. She owns the rights to it.
Hmm.
And Missy's mama was like, if you want to use one of these photos, you can just have it.
Amazing.
So she saved me thousands of dollars. She could have said, well, you have to buy it from me. But Missy, let me tell you the story. And I'm going to try not to cry. I'm going to try to get through
Okay.
one interview and not cry. But
Okay.
Missy Elliott pull it together.
Tears are welcome, by the way.
But see, I cried through all of these stories, and all of my friends are like, Jesus, if I have to see you cry one more time. Okay, so let me tell you the Missy story. So we had gone through like all these women that I love as
Mhm.
a fan had said no, right? But also they had said no to doing interviews. And they had said no to signing off on the photos for the book, right? And I was feeling like my work had no value to them. I was feeling like, wow, I have a best selling book, Supreme Models. I have the documentary for Supreme Models that has 8.5 million views on Vogue's YouTube channel, right? That I executive produced alongside Iman. I have Supreme Actresses, also a bestseller. I'm not playing in this art space. I'm not playing in this publishing space. And yet, every person I went out to do the book had said no. And I was devastated. And so I was going through the list of with one of my best friends who's also like my, in a way, spiritual guru. She's very connected to God and she's very connected to kindness. I was on the phone with her and I was like very upset. And she was like, okay, 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 let's go through the table of contents and let's talk about each person and let's talk about if we could get them. And we got to Missy Elliott and she was like, everybody loved Missy. And I was like, everybody loves Missy. And she was like, what about Missy Elliott? And I was like, well, Missy Elliott said yes to being in the book and she said yes to an interview. Maybe she'd say yes to being on the cover. So I had become friendly with Missy's manager, who's legendary. Her name is Mona Scott Young. So I
Hmm.
had Mona in my phone. So I texted Mona and I said, Mona, would Missy ever be on the cover of on the cover of the book? And so Shanice and I are sitting there. I said this girl's name. Her name is Shanice. So Shanice and I are sitting there going through the rest of the list, talking, and all of a sudden I get a text. It's Mona. Mona says yes! Exclamation points. And I go, what? And she then sends me back a screen capture of Missy texting her saying yes with multiple exclamation points and multiple tears emojis,
Oh,
the face with the tears. And I was like, oh my God, Missy said yes to being on the cover. And Shanice was like, look at God. And I was
mhm.
like, look at God. And I was like,
I didn't think it
just
was
like
possible
that,
to love Missy Elliott anymore. And then you hear a story like that, you know.
just like that. She changed everything. I'll tell you something that I'm not supposed to be sharing. I tried to give the book back. It was so hard to do Supreme Sirens that I went to my literary agent and I said, I will give back my advance.
Whoa.
I can't write this book. I'm not getting any traction with the subjects of this book.
Whoa.
And she was like, you can't give it back. We already took our cut, blah, blah, blah. But Missy said yes to being on the cover. So.
She just turned everything around. It just goes to show sometimes you just need one person.
You need one person to believe in you, right? If you don't believe in yourself, there has to be someone that believes in you. You have to surround yourself with people who believe in you. And my crew, my friends, believe in me. Sergio Hudson is a dear friend of mine, and I met him when he did the documentary for Supreme Models. And we've become, like, literally when we were that day, we were talking about models, and he loves the book, and and we're going through the book, and we're talking about the models that we met, that we love, and we're talking. So from that day on, we were like this. 2 nights ago, Friday night, I did a party for the book. And Sergio was one of the hosts, and Alexandra Shipp, who is in the Barbie movie and in Tick, Tick, Boom. And I interviewed her for Supreme Actresses, and she was one of the hosts. And we had this beautiful, fun party, and it was just a party, no talking, no panel, no discussion. I just wanted a party that played music from the people in the book, in Supreme Sirens. But I didn't want it to be like this highbrow thing. I wanted it to be actually sort of lowbrow. Let's play Missy Elliott. Let's play some Monica. But let's keep it about the culture. Let's keep it very Black. You know, I'm gay, so let's throw in some Frank Ocean, but let's keep it about the Black girls. And that's what we did. And we had like a beautiful time. And the next day I sent Sergio a text and I was like, thank you so much for last night. It wouldn't have happened without you, blah, blah, blah. And he sent me this beautiful series of texts where he was like, what you're doing is so wonderful. And you are so wonderful. And I see you and I want you to keep going. And it was just so, to be surrounded by somebody like that, you know, to be surrounded by somebody like that, and then to get flowers from somebody like that when you didn't expect to get flowers, it was like, that's who I've surrounded myself with, thank God. So when I don't feel like I'm enough, when I feel lost, and I feel lost all the time, because the journey of these books has not been easy. These books are not making me money, right? You need those people that are cheering from you from the sidelines, right? You need those people that are like, bitch, keep going. You know what I mean?
Well, you mentioned in the documentary, which is where you met your friend Sergio Hudson. So I want to focus on the documentary a little bit because, you know, I've seen it about 300 times. It's one of
Which is how we met.
Yeah.
That's how we met. Yeah. Because you did a TikTok about the documentary and I saw it, and what you said about the documentary was so spot on that I was like, who is this woman?
Well, I just say we kind of connected on TikTok because we're both super fans, really. And I feel like that's behind all of everything else. We just love models, right?
Yeah.
So anyone who wants down to talk about models, I'm down to talk to them. It just happens that you're also have many other strings to your bow, but this is how we cross paths. And I was like, wait a minute, this name looks very familiar. This is the guy from my show.
I replied to your TikTok and I was like, oh my God, thank you for what you said. Da, 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 da. And then you replied to me, and then I followed you, and then you followed me back, and then I started replying to all your TikToks. And that's how we met. And here we are.
Here we are. So I'm very familiar with this documentary. The first thing that I was taken by, aside from how important it is that it existed and how happy I was that it was up there on Vogue and they were acknowledging, you know, that things haven't always been peaches and roses in the modeling industry for the Black model. But you got the lineup so spot on because there were so many models that I just see left out the discussion. As soon as I saw Veronica Webb, I was like, okay, this is my show. And then it was just one after another, after another, after another. When the final episode was out, I was like, what do you mean there's no more? Like, where is the rest?
People were heartbroken. We did 6 episodes, but that 6th episode where we tried to clean everything up and we tried to end on happiness, we tried to end on joy. People were like, literally, Karen Alexander was like, wait, there's no more? I was like, well, you did the documentary. Did you do any more? Like there's no more. Like it was so people were like, wait, every week I'm waiting for the new
Yeah.
episode. And I'm like, it's 6 episodes. Like, there's no more. And they're like, well, tell me when season two comes. And I was like,
Yeah.
there's no season two.
Or when you
It's
do
the six.
your big luxury Supreme Models 2, maybe we're gonna get a Supreme Models documentary part 2.
Listen, I'm already, I think in my mind, I think that I could reboot it.
Easily.
I could do it in a different way. And like you said, I think if you look at that cast, it's crazy. Zendaya, Edward Enninful, Anna Wintour, Olivier Ralston, Shioma Nandi, who's now the editor of British Vogue, the slew of models we interviewed, Precious Lee, Paloma El Cesar, who's a doll and an
Mhm.
angel, Veronica Webb, who I think is so smart about fashion. Karen Alexander, who's like epic.
You don't see people mention Karen Alexander very much anymore.
She stood right there next to Naomi and Veronica. It was like there were girls in the late 80s, early 90s were the heyday of the black model
Mhm.
because there were so many beautiful girls, because there was Karen Alexander, who was the face of like Chanel Chance,
Mm.
who was the face of Ralph Lauren, and who was one of the few very dark-skinned girls to really break through. But there was Rashumba, there was Tamiko, and again, all in the documentary. There was, of course, Naomi. There was Lana Ogilvy, who we interviewed for the documentary. There were so many. Here's what I love about the documentary. And this, when people ask me who's in the documentary, I say to them, everyone is in the documentary except for Naomi and Tyra. And they're in the documentary. They just did not do interviews for the
Mhm.
documentary. But we interviewed Beth Ann Hardison. We interviewed Pat Cleveland. I mean, the list of people that did the interviews for Supreme Models, the documentary was crazy and epic. India Moore, we interviewed because we wanted to talk about how trans models have sort of changed the face of fashion. And then designers, Sergio Hudson, I know I'm missing a million people there, but
Which is a good thing because you've got so many of the right people in, you couldn't even begin to list them. And we sit here and we're gushing over how crazy and amazing it is. But actually, it's just done right. It's just done the right way. And people don't do things the right way. And I think that's why 8 million views later, people are still talking about it, still wanting more. I have a question. You don't have to answer it, but I have a question. You just mentioned like the late 80s, early 90s was like this golden era for the black model. Obviously, we know what happened next. Why do you think fashion has been so free to forgive Miuccia Prada?
do you know on TikTok I saw this list of the most successful designers and how much money they make? Miuccia Prada generates billions and tens of billions of dollars. Supposedly, that's supposedly like her net worth or something. And so, yes, Miuccia Prada was the impetus for the whiteout, which is the
Mm-hmm.
period in the late 90s, well into the 2010s, where there was no black models on the runway or there was one black model because Miuccia was so influential in fashion that fashion followed her. So when she stopped using the supermodels and she stopped using people with personalities, i.e., black models, everyone else followed, right? So it was this perfect storm in the 90s because in the late 80s, early 90s, there were so many amazing black models that you couldn't deny them, right? You had
Mm-hmm.
Naomi, you had Tyra, you had Veronica, you had Rashumba, you had a girl named Ilanka Toppenberg, you had, I mean, Lana Ogilvy, you had Kirsty Bowser, you had then later on you had like Kiara Kabukuru and you had Leah Kabede and you had Alec Wet come in and change the face of fashion. There were all these incredible, beautiful black girls that were undeniably the face. And
Mm.
you had these designers that were the ones that were casting these shows, and they were looking for the muse. They were looking for your Deborah Shaw, right? They were looking for these girls that inspired them to create collections around them. You had your Katushas, you had your Munyas, you still had Iman in the game. So you had these like iconic women. And then all of a sudden, those women started to leave the business and do other things. So there wasn't the black model anymore that had the personality or was the star, right? And so right then you had the designers ceding their power to stylists, and all of those stylists were white, and they didn't see the value in the black model. So then you had these stylists doing things where they were like, no black models at the castings, no black models this season. And James Scully, who was a very famous casting agent who championed black models throughout his career, he talks about that in the documentary. All these new white fashion stylists who were maybe not racist, but their behavior was racist, who didn't want to use black girls, who didn't want to use curvy girls, who didn't want to use girls with personality, and wanted it to be about the clothes and the look, and wanted everything to be like a single aesthetic. They became powerful and they did dirt in the name of the designer. But we can't not hold the designer accountable, because when you're at the show and you're doing the lineup and you turn around and you see that there are 0 black models, you know that you're not using black models. Yeah, there were some girls that broke through. There were still girls that were working and doing advertising and doing campaigns and doing editorials. But as the models always will tell you, one of the reasons to do the shows is so that editors will see you on the runway, and then they'll use you in the magazines.
Right.
Then they'll use you in the campaigns. So if you're not doing the shows where all the most important, powerful editors are going, they're not even seeing black models.
But how do you think she got away with it?
Miusha started it, and then everyone else jumped in on it. So you had the Belgian designers follow Miucha's lead. Then you had American designers follow Miucha's lead. Calvin Klein erased the black girl from the runway. So when one designer does it and isn't called out on it, it made it easier for the rest to do it. And that's why Miucha got away with it.
Yeah.
She did it, and then everybody else did it, and then it became commonplace.
And then I guess if she didn't get away with it, then you'd have to F everybody, right? There's no designers left.
Right.
All she could do at that point is put it right, and everyone have to just kind of accept it.
And she did make it right, but it took Beth Ann coming back to the business, and it took Iman being very verbal about it, and it took Naomi and Edward talking about it behind the scenes. It took black fashion to really be brave enough to take the hit. I think that the people that I just mentioned, for them to come out, a lot of times when black people call out racism, it's like, oh, whatever. Everything's racist to you. And so it's diminished. And so for people that are super successful to come out and say, hey, this isn't right, that was brave. And it took those people to actually say it. You know what I mean? It took those people to actually hold their contemporaries to task, right? So if somebody like Beth Ann Hardison and Iman are calling out Miucha Prada, they're on her level. So they had to listen, right? When you have Edward Enninful calling out these designers, and you have a list of designers, and you're literally listing each season how many people of color, Black and Latin and Asian, they use each season. And the numbers are 0, 1, 2 out of 50 girls. You can't argue with that.
No, you can't argue with data, numbers, facts, right? So
you can't argue with facts. 6 seasons in a row, no black girls at Celine. 6 seasons in a row, no black girls at Prada. You're not even reaching back and using Naomi. You're not even reaching back and using the one girl that's broken through, that's become a sensation. How about the fact that Chanel Iman never did Chanel?
Crazy.
But even designers like Chanel, who were historically allies, Karl Lagerfeld was definitely an ally. He definitely always used black models. Even during that period, he was guilty of not using black models. But he was using more black models than everybody else was. But he, again, was using 1 or 2.
Yeah, more just wasn't enough at that time.
and there are Chanel shows where there are no black models,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So yes, he famously used Janelle Williams, who's on the cover of Supreme Models. He was one of the champions of Janelle. But in a show where there's like 30, 40, 50 models and you sprinkle in one and those girls have to eat. Joan Smalls was started during the whiteout.
Mm.
And it was hard for her. Joan, how can you deny Joan Smalls should be doing every single show there is and opening those shows? So crazy that during that period, that Miuccia unfortunately started. But then she came back.
Yeah.
You know, she was the first when she was called out. She was one of the first people to go, okay, let me course correct.
It breaks my heart to end this interview. But we have things to do and places to go, and you are still on your press tour, right?
Abrams is like, you are going to be on the road for 6 months. The book is in bookstores everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I say to people. Even if you go to your neighborhood bookstore and ask them to order any of the Supreme books, because they can order the book. And if they learn about the book, if they don't already know about the book, odds are they will order all 3 books or they will order multiple copies of the book. So go to your neighborhood bookstore and ask them to order Supreme Sirens for you, or Supreme Actresses, or Supreme Models, and tell them about these books and their importance. So you can find the book in bookstores everywhere, but of course, Amazon across the world has it. And then just because I search that all the time, I'm like, bookstores in London that have it. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
bookstores in the UK have it. Like, it's available everywhere. And in a market like the UK that's so about fashion and actresses and models, and singers, the book has done really well. So thank you to my British readers. And so I'm just traveling across the United States. I leave in a week and I go to Chicago for a week. Then I come back and I'm going to Atlanta and I'm doing something hopefully with Missy in Atlanta. Then June is Black Music Month, and it's also Juneteenth in the United States. So I've already got events planned in June, book signings, book parties, the whole 9 yards. So for until at least the end of June, I'm going to be out on the road. I
Amazing.
wish I could come to the UK.
I wish you'd come to the UK too. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
Well, if people ask for the book enough, maybe you'll get a in-store event or something. You know, we have the power to request these things and put people on,
We
and you never know where it's going to lead. So
out.
spread the word.
The other thing I also say to people too is that if you have a Black bookstore, don't think of a Black bookstore as only selling Black books. Go to the Black bookstore and order books by white authors. Because you can go to any bookstore and you can order a book and they will order the book and they get that money for it. So we have to support bookstores in general, but there's so many ways in which we can support bookstores.
I love that. This is a good piece of advice for everyone listening. So, well, it has been an absolute pleasure. I couldn't think of a better way to spend my Sunday afternoon than this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck with the rest of your...
Much for having me, beautiful. And I love your TikToks, and I like sit and I watch and I'm like, you're so thoughtful and you're so provocative in the right way. You know what I mean? Not provocative like in this like gratuitous way, but it's like you're really having the conversations that we should be having around diversity, inclusion, and fashion. There was one TikTok in particular where you talked about Paloma El Cesar, who's in my documentary, and the whole blowback she had when she was named Model of the Year. And when that happened, it actually broke my heart because knowing Paloma, I was like, she doesn't deserve that. She's so kind. And she did deserve Model of the Year. Any of those girls that were nominated.
And I say it every time, any winner I would have been happy with, you know? And Nock didn't want that brought to her door. Why would she want that? You know? Everyone has their time. She will win Model of the Year. I'm certain of it.
She will win next year. Or you know, none of these girls are over. They're all going to continue to work. And sometimes someone means more to fashion than what we're seeing. Paloma El Cesar means much more to fashion than maybe Anuck means in this moment. So maybe if you're like counting covers and you're counting campaigns, yes, Anuck wins that way. Or runway shows, maybe she wins that way. But Paloma means so much to this moment where we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and we're talking about diversity in body size, right? That she is bigger than even the award.
Mm-hmm. And she's also been nominated and lost before. People forget that. She's had her time to lose the award. If people want her to lose so much, she has. You know, she's been around, but we're doing it again.
We're doing it again.
My son is like
We're never
screaming at the door. But it was amazing to talk to you and have an amazing day. Thank you so much, Marcellas. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Marcella's talk. I know I did. Next week, I'm taking you out on the road. We travel down to Kent to meet David James, who is a stylist and archivist, and he shows us around his showroom. It's appointment only, and it's opening soon. And I also sit down with one of the most hilarious people I've ever had the pleasure of interviewing, Radu, about her underwear brand, Voyeur. So you're not going to want to miss it. So you better subscribe. See you next week. Bye. Can you say merci?
Happy.
Can you say bye-bye?